Hi, I'm Jules, and today we're going to be making a reversible bikini. I'm super excited. This is my first sewing tutorial. A little background on me. I have been running a small business called Wild Brush for 7 years. I make artist-designed, eco-friendly outdoor gear, so mainly like bags and packs and things like that, but I've been getting really into sewing my own clothes for the past 2 years. This is my home studio, but don't worry, you do not need all of this for this tutorial. You need a sewing machine, some scissors, and some fabric. A ruler or some type of measuring item would be super nice. But let's get started, and I'm gonna take you through self-drafting a pattern and actually sewing a reversible bikini. I'm so excited. Supplies. You're gonna need a reference suit. You're going to need a pair of scissors. A rotary blade also works. If you are using a rotary blade, I would recommend a cutting mat as well. You need some pins and either some chalk or a marking tool, and a needle to freehand the closure. You're also going to need a machine and thread, but we'll go over that a little bit later. The suit does not have to fit you perfectly, but you should like at least some part of it. It will be the basing off point. You can use a one piece, you could use a sports bra or a pair of undies that you really like, but one thing to keep in mind is how stretchable the fabric is. So I originally based my first prototype actually off of a crop top that I'm wearing that is made out of pretty unstretchable material, which is okay. It's good for climbing or hiking, but it would not be great for swimming, and it did not match how stretchable the fabric I'm sewing with is. So if you match your reference to your actual fabric, you can actually adjust it pretty easily. If you're using a reference like I did at first, that is way less stretchy or way more stretchy than the fabric that you're making your suit out of, we'll have to adjust it either larger or smaller, which is totally fine, super easy. It's just something to keep in mind. It's something I didn't think about when I did my first prototype. I made it out of this super stretchy material based off of the size in the sketch of a top that has very little stretch, and I ended up with a suit that was way too big for me. So we're gonna take that reference suit or top and just kind of take that into mind. Is the sides too tight? Is it too big on the sides? I personally wanted to lower the bottom hem a couple of inches because I have an issue with under boob on this suit and I wanted to feel secure. I also wanted to lower the back a little bit because I thought that would be really cute, and I wanted to increase coverage on the front. So I ended up in just freehanding the scoop a little bit higher on the top. I also realized that I had a lot of side boob with this top, and through adjusting, just kind of like pinching and pulling when you have your reference suit on, you can kind of see where things need to be taken in. So I had a lot of side boob. I realized that I needed the strap to be higher. So I ended up taking about 2 inches off the height of this strap. I kept the sides. I just went down a couple more inches and then I freehanded that scoop. And for the back, I actually traced, you can see I used the prototype, my first prototype of the top that I'm currently wearing, the crop top that I'm wearing, to get that scoop that I wanted. It was just a little bit wider. So you can kind of play around with this, which is really nice. You do not have to make a prototype, but it can be nice if you've never sewn before, or if you're playing around a lot in kind of like freeballing it to see what you like and what you're going for. I just had some old scrap fabric that I was making prototypes out of. You could go to your local fabric store or even a thrift store and find something out of the material you're wanting and just make a prototype. And if it turns out good, then you have another suit. And once you have a prototype, you can use that as a guideline. So like I have that now, and if I want to make another one, I can just reference that suit or reference the suit that I made in this video. This fabric that I ended up using is from Spoonflower. I custom printed it. It is their lycra, I think, sports lycra. You just want to think about stretch. I really like fabric with four-way stretch. This definitely has four-way stretch, but it feels a little bit less stiff on the horizontal versus, or a little bit more stiff on the horizontal. Just something to keep in mind. So for each piece, we'll be cutting out two to make it reversible. So the front of the top has two pieces, the back of the top has two pieces, the front of the bottoms has two pieces, the back of the bottoms has two pieces. And I just folded the fabric over on top of each other so that I got them reflecting. You can use a lining fabric, you can use a different pattern or like a different solid color depending on what you're doing, so that you actually get like two suits in one. I personally only had this fabric, so I made a suit that is identical on both sides, kind of similar to this, so it doesn't necessarily have a right way to be worn, but you could make a suit like these bottoms that has a pattern on one side but can also be a solid bottom on the other, which is pretty fun. Sometimes the pattern or the other side does leak through on the top. Just something to keep in mind, that there might be a little bit of showage when you turn it the opposite way, but it's still adorable. So we're gonna lay out that top and bottoms on your materials. You can also do this on a sheet of paper if you want to create a pattern that you can save and use over and over again. And we're just gonna mark all the way around it. I'm following right along the edge, and we'll add seam allowance later. This is a really great time. You can use multiple tops and just kind of layer them and pick and choose if you like maybe the straps of one but the back of another. And adjust your pattern based off of these things. It is really dealer's choice. You can adjust this any which way you need. And we're just gonna trace all the way around. Before we cut out, we'll be adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance to all sides. So we're just tracing right along the edge, and then as we're cutting, you can either do this before with like a ruler or a measuring tape, just adding little dashes and increasing that seam allowance. That way when we sew it, we're gonna sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That way it's the actual measurements of that reference, versus if you just sewed it based off of the outline, you would end up with a suit that is a 1/2 inch smaller on all sides, which might be a little bit tight. For cutting it out, I personally think it's really helpful to mark reference points. I always mark like the sides the same, so you have the width equal, and then mirror your cut on itself. This makes sure that the scoop and the straps are equal. I personally always mark the width first on the bottom of the suit, and then the side seams up to the armpit curve. This way, when we go to cut it, it ensures that the width is the proper width. You don't accidentally shrink it or enlarge it, but the straps in the front curve are absolutely identical. And we'll repeat the same steps for the other side of the top. So for me in this video, I'm working on the back side. So I traced to the back of my prototype of the other tops and got an outline. I added 1/2 inch. I marked the sides just like I did prior, cut the side so that the width is proper, and then reflected over on itself to make sure that the straps in the back scoop were equal. For the bottoms, I have these reversible Patagonia samples that I got from a gear exchange, and I love these. So I ended up keeping the height, the width, everything. The only thing I don't love is the gusset. It has a very slim gusset that sometimes feels a little revealing if I'm sitting like crisscross applesauce. So I ended up just widening this gusset about 1/4 inch to just give me a little bit more coverage down there, and kept the rest of the suit the same. Again, same thing as the top. You can adjust anything if you wanted it lower rise, if you wanted it higher. If it's a little bit tight, you can take it out, add maybe a 1/4 inch to the sides, things like that. You can increase the height of the leg hole. I know that's really trendy right now. So we're just gonna lay them down and trace, making sure that you're laying it nice and flat and moving the opposite side out of the way. We're just tracing right along the seams. We're also adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance along the bottoms as we're cutting that out. I just kind of free-handed it, eyeballed about 1/2 inch, but you can again take a marking tool and like actually mark out a dotted line that's an extra 1/2 inch along all sides for both pieces, front and back, and on both sides. To make sure I get a really even cut, I fold over. Once I have one side cut out, I just fold it over and mirror it symmetrically. I always mark the sides the same, so I have something, a reference point to go on for the width, but then to make sure that all the curves and things line up evenly so that you don't get a suit that's like a little bit bigger on the left side than it is on the right side. So mirroring it is a really nice way to just like make sure everything is symmetrical. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. Mark the key points like the gusset, the top, the side seams, tracing along the sides of your reference. Make sure to move and adjust the opposite side of the suit out of the way. Once we have all pieces, we're gonna head over to our sewing machine. We're gonna pin the fabric right sides together. So that means the pattern side or the side you want facing out will be placed on top of each other, and we're gonna just pin along all of those seams. This way it just makes sure that nothing gets bunched or bundled while we're sewing. Okay, now we're on to sewing. As you can see, since I am a professional sewist, I have a lot of sewing machines. You can honestly do this on almost any machine. This is a straight stitch machine with stretchy fabrics. We need a stitch that allows for stretch. I don't know if you've ever put on a shirt and had like the stitches rip or burst, you like hear them pop. So since bathing suit fabric is stretchy and we want it to be stretchy, ideally we want a zigzag stitch or an overlock. So I'll be sewing on a serger, but you can do this on any machine that just has a zigzag stitch, or if you only have a straight stitch machine, they make this thread called Elo Flex, and it is a stretch thread. It's really cool, honestly, so that you can sew stretchy fabrics on a straight stitch machine. So if you are using just a normal, literally straight stitch, if you've never sewn before, that's what it's called. If it's just a line, this machine only does that. It has one thing versus this is a Singer heavy duty and it has like 12 different types of stitches. So choose what you need. If you are using a zigzag stitch, you can use any normal all-purpose thread. If you're using a straight stitch, you need a stretch thread. I just got this at Joann's, and it comes in, I think, just black and white. None of these seams will be visible, but you might be able to see the thread through the suit. So like with a light colored suit like this, I'm gonna be using white thread. If you're using a different, like a dark color or different color lining, you can always match the thread to your suit. But I'll just be using white, and I'll be sewing on my serger. If you don't know what a serger is, I'll give you a little tutorial. This is a serger. It is a overlocking machine, which if you look at most of your clothing, this is how things are made. There's different types of overlocking machines. This is like the most basic one. So there are 4 cones of thread, and they basically weave together. You can see right here what each thread does. And this allows for stretch, but also allows that your edges won't unravel. This is like the best tool you can have for sewing clothing. It's so great. If you literally like looking at anything, here are my fleece line jeans because it's freezing outside. That is a serged edge. So serging just makes sure that all the raw edges of your fabrics are contained, and then they can't unpull, which is a big issue when you are doing homemade clothes. If you don't have a serger, like it's completely okay to use the zigzag stitch. And thankfully in this tutorial with a bathing suit, since it's reversible, none of these seams will be open to unraveling, since they'll be sealed up inside. But with other clothing items, if it is something like a shirt or a vest, a pair of pants, if you're not serging them, even the zigzag stitch allows for the stretch, but then the thread can still unpull, if that makes any sense. I'm really tired right now. It's also like 30 degrees in here. But this is a serger. My grandma gave me this. It's really old. It's super old. You can sometimes find old ones on Facebook Marketplace for like $50. I think new, they're like $300, so they're kind of pricey. But you can look for used ones. But again, not necessary for this tutorial. It's just like super handy. It's really handy. We're gonna start with the top. Our first stitches will be along the curves. So that is the front and back scoop in the side seams. Then we're also going to go along the bottom. So this will create two separate pieces. So we have the front and the back. We're sewing them separately, but with both sides, since it is reversible. We'll have two separate pieces, and the only openings will be the side seams and the shoulder seams. Again, we're sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance. On a serger, I just use the full serge. But if you're on a straight stitch machine or a zigzag stitch machine, we're trying for 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, you should have those dash marks from cutting it out, but you can also use a measuring tool, or again, put a mark on it if you need that for guidance. So when we're done, we have two pieces, front and back, two separate pieces with wrong side, or we have two separate pieces with right sides together, the curved lines in the bottom sewn. Next, we're going to take one of those pieces, I personally use the back, and turn it right side out and put it inside the other piece. This is really important. I would take your time with this. You want to make sure that you don't like get any twists in it. Like if you twist the bodice or twist the straps before you sew it, you're going to end up with a permanently twisted strap. So I kind of slowly place it inside and really smooth it out to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat. We are going to pin the opening holes of the straps and the sides. I like to line up the seams and pin there on both sides before I pin the front. We want to kind of avoid stretching one or the other. You want to make sure that everything is laid nice and flat. There usually is, like, regardless of how the suit is sewn, it doesn't always line up perfectly because one is inside the other. So there might be like little discrepancies, and that's okay, but we want to make sure that things are generally lined up so it's comfortable and fits well. So on both shoulders and on the sides, lining up those seams first and pinning seam to seam, and then going around and pinning. We're going to sew through all 4 layers on both straps and the sides. So we're pinning the seams together, but then we're pinning all 4 layers of fabric together on all of those. So making sure that your machine is ready for it. It might, if you're not using a serger, or even if you are, you might need to like do a test on some test fabric to make sure your tension is right, and that your machine can like handle going through something that thick. You might end up having to like backstitch. I know I would have to do that if I was using like my Singer heavy duty. And then we're just sewing through all of that. So we have a fully closed suit at the moment. Once that's sewn, we're gonna take our seam ripper, which I forgot to mention in the list of materials, but you can also use a pair of scissors and just cut some of the stitches. I personally like to do this along the back bottom. Some people do this in like the middle of the shoulder, or on the side of the back shoulder. Usually you do this on the back so that when you're closing it, it's not super noticeable while you're wearing the suit, because we will have to stitch this opening closed. But this is how we'll turn the suit right side out. So we're gonna stitch a little hole. I usually make it probably about an inch and a half. And we're just gonna slowly start turning the suit inside out. We wanna make sure that we're not like ripping stitches or ripping the fabric. So I just kind of slowly feed this through, and you should be able to turn it all the way inside out, and you have basically a finished suit. Our last step is to either hand sew that hole closed, or you can use the machine and just slowly go over it. I would backstitch on both ends to make sure that it is really close. But before we do that, you should try on your suit and see if there is any adjustments that you need to be made. I ended up actually shortening my straps after trying on my suit for the first time. I took off another like 2 inches to get the fit that I really wanted. You can kind of adjust if it's too big on the sides. You can take that in. There's a lot of like simple adjustments. If you need to adjust like the curve or something like that, you might have to disassemble quite a bit of it to get to a spot that you would then be able to just like bring the seams in, bring the hems in if you need to shorten this. It's all pretty simple and based off of what we went over in drafting. Like if your suit is too long, you're just gonna go take apart the 2 pieces and just sew the seam a little bit higher up. If you want a deeper cut in the front, you'll just go in again, take the 2 pieces apart, you take the front part and bring the seam further in. If you need to add more fabric, you could sew with less of a seam allowance, but unfortunately once the fabric's been cut, like you can't add 2 inches to it, but you could get away with using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that you can get a little bit more fabric if you need it to be taken out. That's what they do a lot. If you're like taking out a pair of pants, they just lessen the seam allowance so that you widen the fabric a little bit. And then we're gonna move on to the bottoms. So we're gonna do the same thing that we did for the fronts, like basically identical. I personally really hate kind of bulky seams in the crotch of swimsuits. When I first prototyped this, I actually made it seamless down there, but my pattern is directional, and a lot of patterns are, so that kind of makes it a bit more difficult. I would have had flowers upside down on one side of my suit if I had done this way. So I really like to start with actually the crotch seam first. This just makes sure that there's like no extra little bulk. Sometimes if it doesn't line up well, like on the shoulders, if it gets a little bulky or like there's like a little divot, it doesn't matter. But in the bikini line, in the crotch, something like that can be really irritating if you have sensitive skin. I don't want like a little bump out. So I sew the crotch seams together first. So you're gonna, again, take the front and back, whether it's the same pattern or different patterns, and pin those crotch seams together and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This way, if they're not perfectly lined up, you can kind of trim them to be nice and smooth so that there's no extra bulk in there. Now we're gonna pin. So we are going to put the fabric right sides together. I always pin the crotch seams first and then go to the corners and the tops. Make sure that those straight edges are lined up before we start going around the curves of the leg hole. That way you have a little bit of room if you need to like pull or adjust slightly. We are going to sew just like the top, the curves, and then the tops. So the top and the bottom, I guess, in this two-piece that we have going together right now. So the curves of the leg hole and then the top and bottom on either side, leaving the sides open. This next part can be a little confusing. So now that we have that finished, we're gonna basically do what we did with the top, except the bottom crotch seam is already sewn, just like if we had done the straps first or something like that. We just have the sides open. So we can't just take one and put it inside the other. We have to actually fold it into itself to get it right sides facing, which sounds a little confusing, but I promise it's not. It's okay. We got this. So we're going to take that one side of it and put our hand in. And we're going to take the other side and start tucking it in through the crotch seam. So it will come through the middle already, right side out. Just like the front, we want to make sure that it's nice and smooth. There's no twists or turns, and we're lining up the proper sides. But you should be able to get it nice and flat in there, and then pin the side seams, and we're going to be sewing down each side through all 4 layers of the bottoms. Again, take your time, rewatch that if my ADHD got the best of me. It does sound a little confusing to like throw it through its own self, but you just kind of start stuffing it and it will come out. And then you can make sure when you do that, you can like kind of run your hand and feel that it's flat. It should lay nice and flat before you pin and start sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're just going to sew right down those sides, and just like the front, we have now basically inside out closed bikini. Like it should feel like a weird envelope. And we're going to rip another hole, either with a seam ripper or a pair of scissors. I personally like to do this in the back top of the hem. So on the top of the suit, along the back side, I'll just rip a little hole. You could also do this in one of the leg holes, inch, 1/2 inch, and we're gonna just flip the suit through that. You should be able to pull out a fully finished suit. Again, just like the tops, this is a great time to try on your suit. Make sure that it fits. See if there's any adjustments, if you need to lower it, if you need to take out the seams a little bit. If there are any twists or turns, I definitely sewed a prototype where I had twisted like the crotch seam up and it was not flat. So this just gives you a chance to try it on, make any adjustments before you close the hole. It's so cold in here. I have goosebumps. So I'm doing this for you guys. I just tried on the suit. I did not sew it closed yet, so there is still a hole somewhere back there. But having it on, I can tell already the straps are slightly too big. So I'm gonna go up and just kind of pinch. And it looks like I need to take like 2 inches off the straps, which is an issue I've had with that brown suit before, is that the straps fall down. So I am going to turn it back inside out and unstitch. I don't even have to unstitch the top, but I will, just so that I make sure that it's lined up nicely, and sew it just a little bit lower down. I'm going to move the back up. I don't know why, that feels better, just to give me more support, but the bottoms fit perfectly all the way around. I could see maybe eventually needing to take in a little bit more. This fabric has not been washed yet. Usually you're supposed to wash your fabric before you sew with it. But since it's printed, usually the heat of the printing process like shrinks it already. But I am running an ultra marathon in 2 weeks, so I'm a little bit more fit than I normally am. So I'm gonna leave the bottoms for now. And if they bother me, I can always unsew them and I'll take the sides in a a little bit more. So I'll just increase that angle on the sides, just so that it's a little bit tighter on the top of the waist. So I'm gonna fix this. But the last step, if your suit is perfect, is to just go in and you can either machine stitch, so not on a serger, but either with the zigzag or the straight stitch, that line close. I will be hand sewing it so that it's hidden, and I'll record that to show you guys, but that's just gonna be a couple seconds. I'm gonna overlay it right here. And that is your suit. I was hoping to have enough fabric to sew a halter top version. And I might try to piece together a halter out of these scraps. If I do that, the tutorial would probably be separate, because I wanted to make this top. I thought that would be a really cute bikini top in this pattern. Just a little bit, this is modest, which I like. It will be good for swimming. I just thought this would be cute and I could wear it as a shirt too. Just like a little halter crop. But stay tuned, that will come next. Maybe I'll do it in a different pattern. But let me know how this went for you. I want to see what you sewed. Please let me know if you have any comments, how you liked this tutorial. This is all new for me and I would love your feedback so that I can teach you better and show you more things. And I know I need a better phone camera because I have to use my front camera. My back camera's broken. So I'll work on better lighting and better camera. But I love you. I love sewing and I hope that you can too. I hope you also get to make a suit that fits your body properly and like actually checks all the boxes that you need so that you can feel comfortable and happy and loved and safe while you're swimming. Happy sewing.